So, welcome everyone to this joint webinar brought to you by the Association of Healthcare Journalists and the National Association of Science Writers. I'm Jyoti Madhusudanan. I'm a Civic Science Fellow for AHCJ, and I also serve as Treasurer for NASW. This webinar is one in a series of training opportunities for journalists. And today's topic is digital privacy and keeping your information safe online. A little bit of context. A 2022 survey of about 12,000 journalists found that more than 40% of them experienced online threats and harassment in the previous year. Health and science journalists are no exception to this problem. And it's a risk that's poised to worsen as policymakers prepare to discuss health topics such as vaccines and climate change. Today's webinar will provide ideas and resources that help you assess your digital safety practices and be more secure online. Joining us today are two fabulous speakers, Tat Bellamy-Walker, who is Program Manager of Digital Safety Training and Resources at PEN America, and Alison Joyce, who is a Senior Analyst on the Information Security team at the New York Times. Our guests will first present and then answer your questions. You can ask questions at any time by typing them into the Q&A space, specifically the Q&A space and not the chat. I will direct the questions to our guests. And we'll go ahead and get started. Tat, would you please start us off?
Yes, just give me one moment. Okay, hello everyone. As you know, I'm Tat. I am the Program Manager for Digital Safety Training and Resources for Media at PEN America. So since we are talking about online abuse, it's really important that we have a shared language around what online abuse is. So at PEN, we define online abuse as the repeated or severe targeting of an individual or group online through harmful behaviors. And we use the words repeated to point to the volume or the amount of abuse you are receiving. For example, someone flooding your cell phone or your email with so much spam that you can't use it anymore. And we also use the words severe to show that this can be just one incident that can have very serious consequences. For example, if you have been doxxed and someone posts your home address and threatens you. So now that we understand, what online abuse is, I'd love for us to jump into some of the tactics. So we have hateful speech. So that's any speech that targets someone's identity. For example, their race, their ethnicity, their gender. For myself, while I was on the communities beat at the Seattle Times, I experienced a great deal of hate speech, right? That targeted me not only for being Black, but also for being trans. And then we have threats. So threats of physical or sexual violence are intended to instill fear and intimidate a target. And we see that women, non-binary, and transgender people face more threats of sexual violence. Next, we have cyber mobs. So a cyber mob is a coordinated attack by a group of abusers with the goal of overwhelming the target or person with a lot of threats, slurs, or insults. And then we have doxing. So doxing is the publishing of personal private information. So that includes, your home address, your kid's daycare, or your personal phone number. So some additional tactics to be aware of are online impersonation. So that's when someone creates a fake account to post inflammatory or wild remarks about you or an institution. And we have seen an increase in this because of a lack of verification on many platforms. For example, on X, users have the ability to pay for verification. So say someone can use my name and my photo and make posts to discredit me or, the newsroom that I work for. And next we have message bombing. So message bombing is when someone floods your account with a lot of useless information, and it makes it harder for you to find important information. For example, if your Facebook is being hacked, right, the hacker might flood your email or your account with a lot of useless information, and then you might miss a notification that reads or says, unauthorized user attempted to access your account. Then we have non-consensual intimate images. And this is known more commonly as revenge porn, but we don't call it that because it is not porn, right? These are sexually explicit images that are being shared without your consent. And finally, we have gender disinformation. So this is the spreading of deceptive or inaccurate information and images to attack or undermine a person. And this can either have political, social, or economic motives. So now that we have an understanding here about, the definition of online abuse and some of the tactics, I'd love for us to jump into a really quick activity on how to dox yourself. And of course, I'm not going to teach you how to expose your personal information online, but I do want to help you think like a doxer so that you can find what information is available about you online, and then you can try to remove it. And just a quick trigger warning for folks. Some folks do feel scared about what they see about themselves online. So just remember, our goal is really to empower you, with strategies to take control of your digital footprint. So when you're going, when you start doxing yourself, right, you're going to start with a really simple Google search. But before we Google ourselves, we want to make sure that we're not logged into our Gmail accounts. And this is because Google has really advanced tracking. So you're going to get different results as you than if you're someone else. Because of this, we also recommend you try different search engines. So as you can see on the screen, we have some privacy respecting search engines, such as DuckDuckGo or Brave Search. There are also international ones that you might want to try, like Yandex and Badu. So when you're Googling yourself, or you're using a different search engine, you might want to try different variations of your name, your phone number, maybe adding in names of your close family members, your usernames, your handles, thinking about different things like that when you are doing like a quick Google search to see what comes up about you. So now that moves us to Google Dorking. So Google Dorking is another way you can use search engines to get exactly what you want. And if it's helpful for the folks here, please feel free to take a screenshot of this slide. As you can see in the red box on the screen, we have the email roseduper@gmail.com, and that email is in quotation marks. And then we have file type, :PDF. So introducing this sort of operant, roseduper@gmail.com with the quotation marks, also with file type :PDF. So introducing this sort of operant into your search engine will help you find any old resumes or any other docs with your personal information. Many of us, some of us, grew up in a time where you put your home address and every personal information possible on a resume. And something like this could be a way that you can find docs that, have that personal information, about you on the internet. So we've just learned how to, search for, our names, our cell phone numbers, our families, and, different things like that. So now I'd like to move everyone to look up your images, right, to see where you show up. So you might want to try searching your name on Google Images, or you can upload a photo of yourself into Google. Then you can right click on the picture and select Google Lens. And this can help you see if your image is being used in places that you don't recognize. And this is a very short snippet of a much longer anti-hacking, anti-doxing workshop. And if you want to learn more about our programs at Penn, feel free to scan the QR code on the screen or reach out to me at my email. I also wanted to let folks know about our journalist safety urgent care helpline. So we have a helpline to, to provide, different various supports to folks. And this helpline was created in collaboration with the Night Election Hub, PEN America, IWMF, and several other organizations. So feel free to email us and we can help you with your digital, physical, psychosocial, or other legal concerns. So that's from me.
Thank you so much, Tat. I just want to quickly remind viewers that you can ask your questions of our presenters in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them after Alison's presentation, which we will now hear. So over to you, Alison.
Great. I'm just going to share my slide here. Okay, so hi everyone again. As mentioned, my name is Alison Joyce. I'm a senior analyst on the information security team at the New York Times. And I am really happy to be here today because it's always a joy talking about, well, it's not the most happy subject. It's always very exciting for myself to spread knowledge and awareness on digital security tools and best practices to make sure that you feel more safe and comfortable with protecting yourself digitally. So before I dive into the meat of my slides here, I like to take a few moments to focus on threat modeling. So this is something that we do with journalists before any situation they may be entering into to ensure that they are appropriately prepared and that we have vetted any risks or concerns they may have. So being
I'm so sorry to jump in, Alison. We're seeing notes, not your slides.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Hold on. Let's see. Okay. Sorry about that. You saw my speaker notes. So, okay, hopefully you can see my slides now. Great. So as mentioned, so for threat modeling, this is something that we recommend our journalists do before any situation that they may be entering into to make sure that they are appropriately prepared for anything they may have concerns about. And that can be very widespread. It could be something that is very digitally focused. So, hey, I'm really concerned that as Tat just talked about, that I'm going to be doxxed, right? Or this could be something more physical. I'm heading into a specific rally, right? Or I'm going to cover protests in this specific location. I'm concerned about my physical safety. So why we recommend doing threat modeling ahead of a story is, or really ahead of anything that you may be preparing for, is to make sure that you have the appropriate resources in your toolkit so that you can reduce the likelihood of some of these risks from occurring. So first question is always, what do I want to protect? So as mentioned, that could be your physical safety. It could be your gear, your physical devices, the data on those devices, your source information. And then moving on to questions like, who do I want to protect it from, right? So is it a hostile source? Is it an international government? It could be pickpockets or thieves. And again, it's very widespread, but understanding what are you trying to protect and who are you trying to protect it from are some of the best first questions to ask yourself. And then what are the consequences if I fail? So if I am unable to protect my physical devices, or if I am unable to protect my physical safety or my source information, like what could happen? Could I be physically assaulted? Could I experience doxing or experience any type of online threat or harassment? So understanding what is really like worst case scenario so that you are appropriately prepared. And then this next question of how likely are the consequences is really important because while it's valid for all of us to be concerned about everything that we're hearing in the news and, it never ends with companies being breached, or, you know, spyware potentially being installed on a device, and so on and so forth. Not every risk is applicable to every situation. So again, if you're attending a rally in Arizona, the risk of spyware being installed on your cell phone is significantly lower than the risk of spyware being installed on your phone if you were traveling to, say, a country like China. So every situation has its own risks and the likelihood of those risks from occurring. And so asking yourself, what is the likelihood here? And then moving on to how can I address those risks? And that's really the tools, the best practices, the settings that I'm going to go over some of those today. So the topic of today's discussion are protecting your accounts, reducing your online footprint, and securing your communications. I'm going to walk through a couple of tools and best practices that apply to each category, but the general idea here is if you are using the recommended tools in your toolkit, you are in really great shape from a security perspective. So starting with account security, there are two main tools that we want to focus on when it comes to account security. So the first is using a password manager. A password manager is a one-stop shop application that stores all of your passwords into one organized and secure place. So password managers, they're typically end-to-end encrypted, so only you have access to the data that you are inputting into the tool, which is really great. There are a handful of password managers out there. Many of them are really great. Some of the more popular ones I have listed on the slide here. Those would be LastPass, 1Password, and Dashlane. As a note, 1Password offers free accounts to journalists when you submit your credentials to them. So look into that if you're interested in getting set up with a password manager and you don't want to have to pay the monthly or yearly cost for it. It's a really great benefit of the tool and something that we advise our freelancers to do if they're looking to get set up with. A password manager, and again, they don't have to pay the cost of it. So the main reason we recommend using a password manager is to store all of your account information is so that you avoid repeating your passwords across accounts and avoid storing them in unsafe locations. So password managers can typically recommend strong passwords and unique passwords for you when creating a new account. And they can typically flag when you're repeating passwords across accounts, which is really great. And then also they can help you with updating those passwords. So many benefits to the tool. If you're not currently using a password manager, I would just recommend start with one of them and get comfortable with using it, play around with the tool. And there's many benefits of tools like LastPass, for example, has a Chrome browser extension. You can download that. All of these password managers also have mobile applications as well, which makes it really seamless when working across multiple devices. So it's one of the best first steps you can take with account security to, again, just make sure that you no longer are storing your passwords in an unsafe place, and also that you can avoid repeating your passwords across different accounts. I personally use LastPass. I love it, and it really does save me so much time with having to store, populate, and create new passwords. I can't remember the last time I had to actually remember a password and type it into any account because the tool just does it all for me, which is really great. The next account security best practice is using two-factor authentication. So the two most secure forms of two-factor authentication are using a physical security key or an authenticator app. So security keys are the most secure form of 2FA because it is a physical key, right? Only you have access to that physical key. And when prompted for a second level of verification, you would input that key into your computer or use the NFC feature, which allows you to hover it in front of your phone to confirm verification. Typically nowadays, most keys are USB-Cs. You can find them on Amazon for a relatively cheap price. Some of the more common ones are YubiKeys. That's what we use at the Times. But look around if you're interested. Again, find them, order them on Amazon. But it's a physical way to confirm verification for any of the accounts that you are using. The other form of authentication that we recommend using is an authenticator app. So some of the more popular ones are Microsoft or Google Authenticator. These applications work by generating a time-based passcode on your mobile device. So when logging into your account, you would open the application and enter the current code that is displayed, which then confirms your identity as the authorized user. One note I'll say about Microsoft Authenticator, because I know it's just a very common one that's used. And if you're currently using it, this is just a good heads up. So Microsoft Authenticator does not back up to the cloud by default. So you will want to go into your settings and turn that feature on if you are using the tool. And this will help you so that if you ever have to replace your phone, update your phone in the future, and you have the new phone with you, when you download Microsoft on that new phone, you will be able to populate those codes and pull them from the cloud. Whereas if you don't turn that setting on, you will unfortunately lose those codes. And we've dealt with many employees at the times that are like, hey, I just got a new phone and I don't know where any of my codes are. And it's because they didn't have that setting turned on. Google, it's turned on by default, so you do not need to take any actions with Google. But if you're using Microsoft, please turn that setting on so you don't lose your codes. You'll have to sign in with a personal account. So if you don't have a personal account, just spin one up so that you can retrieve those codes if you ever need to replace your phone. All right, moving on to reducing your online footprint. So one of the best ways to reduce your online footprint is to clean up your social media accounts and ensure that you are comfortable with the content that you have on them. So general rule of thumb with socials is to keep your work and personal accounts separate. So if you're currently using, say, Instagram for both work and personal, I would recommend creating 2 different accounts and making the personal one private. Our information security team has an open source version of our social media security and privacy checklist that I will provide after this training, and the checklist walks through the different settings that we would recommend implementing for each social media platform that you use. I have listed on the side here some of the key settings, though, for your social media accounts that you should have in place. So first and foremost, as we just talked through password managers, you should have a unique and strong password for each social media account. And you should also have 2-factor authentication set up. And ideally, you're using an authenticator app or a security key for authentication instead of SMS-based authentication, which is just a less secure form of authentication and something that we are recommending our staff, but just people in general, to move away from because it is not as secure as using an authenticator app or a physical key. Another best practice is to audit old posts for social media accounts. So many of us have had our socials for many years. And so a good best practice is just take the time, go through your old tweets, your old Instagram posts, Facebook posts. Just make sure you're comfortable with the content that you have posted maybe from 10 years ago, and that there's nothing out there that could be used to harm you or used to dox you in any way. We at the New York Times, we will do like online footprint reviews for our executives quite often. And it's more common than you would think, where we'll find a photo where there's a kid's school in the background, or a license plate, or a home front door with the numbers behind them. So just always have awareness as to what photos, what content is out there on you, and do a cleanup of old posts. And then lastly here, hiding friends and followers from public view is also something that's really helpful with your socials. I'm sure Tat could speak to this as well, in the sense that oftentimes malicious users pivot very quickly from yourself to a family member or a friend to try to find more information about you online. And so even if your accounts are really well locked down, if they're able to pivot to a family member, there's usually a likelihood that at least one friend or family member isn't as locked down with their socials, and they may be sharing more information than you would like about yourself. So we all have that one aunt or grandma or grandpa that overshares so much about you on their socials out of, their good heart. They're not meaning to do anything harmful about it. But if someone's looking to find information about you, they could very easily pivot to that aunt or uncle or whoever it may be. So hide your followers from public view, and also just have a conversation with family members and say, if you find information on their pages, like with multiple photos of you and their accounts are public, to say, hey, would you mind taking these down just to protect myself with my job? And you can always say, like, our security team asked us to do it, so you could put it on us, but also something that goes overlooked but can reveal a lot of information about yourself or your family. Also, with cleaning up your online or reducing your online footprint, Delete Me's a really great tool to put in place if you are already using it. So it is a tool that scrubs your data from the top 30 or 40 data brokers in the United States. It works on an ongoing basis. So once you are set up with the tool, you can kind of just let it work in the background, and it will send you quarterly reports as to what data the tool removed and what data broker sites they removed that data from. The tool is about $8 a month. So it's obviously, like, if that's affordable to you, I would recommend signing up for an account. It's a really easy and effective way to start removing your information from these sites. And you'll notice a pretty significant difference once you're set up with the tool. With, when you do a quick Google search of your name, you're not going to see as much of those like really large data broker sites that always have your phone number, your email address, your home address. You're not going to see that anymore with when you have a Delete Me account set up. So again, really effective, kind of easy way to start reducing your online footprint. And when you sign up for an account, you'll fill out an entire like data sheet with all past addresses, phone numbers, emails, things of that nature. So it works pretty well to help scrub your info. Okay, and then last topic for me today is secure communications. So the most important thing I want to stress here is encryption. So there are two forms of encryption that all of your work communications should include. Those are TLS encryption, and end-to-end encryption. So the main difference between the two is that TLS is implemented between a user and a server, whereas end-to-end encryption is between two servers. So TLS keeps data secure in transit between a user and a server, but the data on the server itself is not encrypted. So there is a risk of that data being exposed or breached when it's being stored in an unencrypted form on the servers. There are different use cases as to when it's appropriate to use the different forms of encryption, but the general rule of thumb is that for any sensitive or confidential communications, you should be using end-to-end encrypted applications such as Signal, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, FaceTime, or iMessage. This isn't an exhaustive list, but some of the more popular end-to-end encryption options that I know many of us are using on a day-to-day basis. TLS encryption is great for day-to-day business activity. Obviously, we're using Zoom right now, and most of us use Gmail every day. As mentioned, though, if your conversation is more sensitive or confidential in nature, I would recommend leveling up to using an end-to-end encrypted app. My last note on this is that you should generally be avoiding platforms that have no encryption at all. So that would include things like SMS text messages. So green bubble text messages have no encryption applied to them, or standard phone calls on most modern smartphones are not fully encrypted. So if you can, level up to using, WhatsApp for your phone calls, or using iMessage or Signal or WhatsApp for your messaging, and avoiding using SMS messages. Okay, and then lastly here, I'm just going to drill into some of the end-to-end encrypted apps and their notable settings, which I think can be helpful to be aware of. So Signal is the gold standard of encrypted communications. If you can use it, use it. Like if you're working with sources and they're willing to use Signal to communicate back and forth with you, that's great because they are definitely the best tool for secure communications. What's really great about Signal is that they have robust disappearing messages options. So if you want your messages to disappear after a couple minutes or a few days, there are many options to choose from, which is really great. And they also, this is a somewhat newer feature with Signal, is that they keep your phone number private now, so you don't need to worry about your phone number being exposed or provided to, say, a source that you don't fully trust. With WhatsApp, they're another great option for sensitive conversations, but the platform does store much more metadata than Signal does, so that's just something to keep in mind. They're also owned by Meta, which do with that as you may. With WhatsApp, you have to enable encrypted backups in your settings to ensure your conversations remain encrypted when they are backed up to the cloud. So if you currently use WhatsApp, make sure to go in and check your backup encryption option in your settings and toggle that option on if it's not already on. What that does is it makes sure that when your chats are backed up to the cloud, that they stay in encrypted form. That is not turned on by default. So you have to turn that setting on. And obviously, as I just mentioned, encryption is really important when it comes to sensitive conversations. So assuming you want to keep your chats fully protected, definitely go in and turn that setting on for WhatsApp. For iMessage and FaceTime, both of these platforms are typically associated with your personal number. So if you're not comfortable with revealing that, you may want to use another platform for communications where you can use an alternate number like a Google Voice. But for iMessage, you do have to go into your settings and enable iCloud Advanced Data Protection to keep your chats end-to-end encrypted. So again, just go and check that setting, take a screenshot of this slide if that would be helpful, just to make sure you have these settings in place. And then, as I mentioned, Google Voice is a great one if you want to use an alternative phone number when reaching out to sources. And that's all of my content. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Alison. And thank you to both of you for that absolute wealth of information. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A. Before we jump into it, I think Catherine wanted to try a poll. Maybe we'll just give her a minute to set up. Okay, there we go. So as folks are filling that out, I would love to get us started just with a question of my own, which is about online transcription services, things like Otter and Rev, and there's so many other options out there now. Should we be concerned about using these for transcripts and protecting sensitive information or sources when uploading information to these sites?
Yeah, I can chime in on that question, if that's okay. So there are risks to using recording and transcription apps. I know during my time as a journalist and reporter, transcription apps were very helpful in terms of workflow. But there are risks to using these apps, and you as like the journalist are the best person to weigh the risk depending on the sensitivity of the story or the information involved. There's a really good blog post by the Freedom of the Press Foundation. I could drop it in the chat if it's helpful. And in this blog post, the Freedom of the Press Foundation, they recommend using a transcription tool that allows you to turn on two-factor authentication. So as we had mentioned earlier, 2FA requires you to provide a PIN to prove you are the person logging into an account. So again, maybe use a transcription tool that allows you to turn on 2FA. Another recommendation is to again, practice password hygiene. So use long, complex passwords, right, that are 16 or more characters. And, using some of these strategies can help protect yourself from hacking. And hacking is the unauthorized intrusion into a device or network, usually with the goal to, steal or leak data or impersonate an individual. And what we don't want to happen is that someone has your password and is able to log into your account and download your transcripts. So taking some of those precautions can help. I also recommend using an offline friendly transcription service that might be helpful, as well as downloading the transcripts from the app and then deleting it from that app. So downloading the transcripts and making sure that you do not keep those transcripts on the on the app. So those are a couple of tips that I have.
Thank you. And also thank you to everyone that just took the poll as we were talking about transcription. Since we have a lot of questions here, we're going to jump into those. The first one up here is, does searching itself reveal things? If I search my name and file type PDF, does that automatically allow bots to know about the document I'm looking for?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if bots will be able to figure out what you are looking for, but I would suggest maybe using a privacy respecting search engine, like some of the ones that I had mentioned, like Brave Search or DuckDuckGo. That might be an option, as well as I'm not sure where you're based, but there's also international ones like Yandex and Badu. But I don't know, Alison, do you have like any recommendations on whether bots can figure out like what you're searching, especially if you're searching for something like your resume that might have like a home address or phone number?
Yeah, I don't have anything like in particular to add. It's a good question. It's the first time that's come up. Yeah, I wouldn't have anything like additionally to add there beyond using the more privacy focused browsers if you can, as Tot mentioned. But yeah, interesting question.
We have another question. Well, I'll try and group these together. One is, how secure is Delete Me itself? And we have a related question where someone says, I use Delete Me, but every time I Google my name, I find at least one news site with my address. Are these types of programs a waste of money?
Yeah, so Delete Me will work in cycles, right? They work on it for the most part an ongoing base to remove your data from the top data broker sites. That's not to say that they are going to remove your information from every data broker. They're looking at the top ones in the United States. So if you have a Delete Me license and you find a website that has your address or any other personally revealing information like a phone number or an email, you can submit a custom removal request through Delete Me to have that specific, maybe smaller data broker have that page removed on your behalf. So I would recommend doing that. Another thing to note too, Delete Me will sometimes remove like property record information. Sometimes they don't. Property records are public information by default. So even if a tool like Delete Me, if you submit a custom removal request, like, hey, I found my home address on this specific site, can you remove it? Like a Realty Hop is a really popular one that has oftentimes property records on it. more times than not, that record will get republished back again. So you can kind of like continually request those types of sites be removed. Sometimes they're out of scope for Delete Me, but that's just one thing to note with addresses. Unfortunately, home addresses are typically public records, and unless you have your home in like an LLC where it's not affiliated with your name, that can usually pop back up on certain sites. But yeah, you can submit custom removal requests with Delete Me if you're finding stuff that you want removed.
We have one other question about Delete Me, which is if you use Delete Me, will it make it harder for people to look you up related to your job? So if an editor is looking for an online portfolio and they search for your name, would they still be able to find that portfolio?
Yes, they would. So to be very clear, Delete Me is not removing all information about you online. It's just removing information on the top data brokers. Data brokers being they're ingesting data from different sources, and it's typically like your email address, your phone, your home address, address as well. So if you did a quick Google search of yourself right now, I guarantee you're going to see some data broker sites where it's like the white pages or whatever it may be, where it's saying usually they're behind a paywall where it's saying like sign in and pay this to see, you know, all the email address we have for you. Delete Me is not removing all of your personal information online. So if say you've been interviewed before by someone or you have all these publications, it's not scrubbing that. So if you had a company or a boss or, you know, whoever trying to find portfolio information on you, they still would. Delete Me is just looking to or working to remove from the top data brokers.
Thank you. Another question is about just location, which the person asks, I'm guessing a lot of this is not applicable to those of us in Europe who have privacy laws to protect us. So if you could speak maybe about that and then more broadly about people who are not in the US.
Yeah, so Delete Me is really helpful for US based people because data brokers are very prevalent in the United States because of the more strict privacy laws in Europe with like GDPR. They're not as prevalent, so I wouldn't push something like a tool like Delete Me as heavily if you're located in Europe than if you are located in the United States. Delete Me has international licenses, so if say you're between a few different countries and, you know, as Tat mentioned, just doing a Google search of yourself and like first and foremost, just seeing what's out there on you. So if you're in Europe now, but you've spent time in the United States and you do a Google search and you're like, oh, you know what, actually, there's still some like old information about me on these data brokers, or they have my family information, that might still be a good use case to get set up with the tool. So first, just like see what's out there on you, regardless of where you're located. But yeah, absolutely, the tool is not as prevalent in Europe because of GDPR regulations. Data brokers just aren't as big of a thing. But as I said, Delete Me does have international license, so you can look into those if you are still interested.
With regards to social media, we have a question that says, if I deactivate an old social media account, like an old Twitter account or an X account, can people still find it or search for it in other ways?
Yeah, I don't know if Tat has anything that he wants to add in here, but typically when you deactivate account, it's usually not visible anymore, depending on how long ago you deactivated it. So if it was recent, there may be still the ability to see the deactivated account as deactivated. But I would say that if you are, you know, deactivating your accounts, to give it a little bit of time, but those shouldn't show anymore if someone's looking for your like Facebook account, say on Google, that profile shouldn't show because it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. I would just also like to add that when you create a new account, just make sure to you know, stay safe on social media. I know a big part of, you know, our jobs as journalists is to be online. So again, you know, make sure, or you know, remove, you know, your birth date, you know, pictures of your family members, and turn off, you know, location on, you know, your location and your privacy settings, you know, when you're on a different account if the account you had is deactivated.
This question says, some of us may have been hacked in the general attacks that happen at medical centers or retailers or just out in the world that's unrelated to our work as journalists. If this has happened to someone years ago for medical staff, does that put them at any higher risk in the journalism world too?
That is a good question. Alison, do you have anything to add on that? All I know that there is a website that you can check um, where you could see if your information has been exposed in different data breaches that I can drop into the chat. But Alison, is there anything you would like to add on that?
Yeah, I would say don't be too concerned about it if it's from like a past breach. If you have an idea of like what data may have been exposed in the breach, that's always helpful too. But as Tom mentioned, and I'm assuming Tom, you're referencing the Have I Been Pawned?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there we
That's a
go.
helpful one.
Yeah, just dropped into the chat.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a helpful one just to see like has your information been a part of past breaches, but I wouldn't say like you should be super concerned going forward if some of your information has been exposed. To be honest, and to be like very maybe potentially grim here, so many companies every day are experiencing data breaches, and we use, I mean, just look at your phone and how many applications you have and accounts with. So it's a bit like naive to assume your data is never going to be a part of a data breach. And that is why it's so important to make sure that you're using strong passwords and you're using two-factor authentication so that, if your Bank of America account was hacked, or if Bank of America experienced a data breach, that like, even if your username and
Oh my
password,
God, 27 times.
oh, 27 times. Even if your information has been exposed in the past, like if you have strong digital security settings in place now, then I would say you don't need to be as concerned about it. The only thing I'll say is if you've been a part of like financial fraud in the past, it's always helpful to have like additional alerts put in place, and having like credit monitoring set up and in place. But as far as just like digital security, as long as you're using two-factor authentication, you're using a password manager, maybe you get set up with Delete Me, like you're doing all the things you need to be doing now to avoid any risks from a previous data breach that you may have been a part of.
Christine asks, how do you handle two-factor authentication when you're in areas where there is no cell reception?
That's a really great question. So one of the many reasons why I love authenticator apps or physical security keys is that you do not have to be dependent on cell service and reception or being connected to Wi-Fi. So if you are traveling, say you just land in another country and your phone's not even, connecting to anything yet, your Google Authenticator app or Microsoft Authenticator app are still going to generate those codes for you. So you have access to them at any time. Obviously, if you're using a physical security key, you will also hopefully have that on you. Or, I always say when folks are traveling, like put it on your keychain or put it on a chain around your neck and almost wear it as a charm. They're like really little, the security keys. Then you have it with you. So you're not having to wait for a text message to come through to your phone with the authentication code that you're waiting for to sign into whatever account you're signing into.
We have a couple of questions about WhatsApp. Firstly, is WhatsApp still recommended given Meta? And another related one with current policy changes and so on, if WhatsApp is maybe no longer such a secure choice and how you sort of navigate that.
Yeah, and Tat, jump in here wherever you want. But with WhatsApp, so what we always say at the Times is there's no 100% right or 100% wrong communication method. You have to meet your sources where they're at, or you have to meet your peers where they're at. So if they're using WhatsApp, fine, use WhatsApp. It's still a really great tool. I don't want to end this presentation with you being like, oh, she said, I don't know, maybe it's not as secure. it's end-to-end encrypted. It's great. It is owned by Meta, so you have to at least have awareness of they're most likely storing more data about you, or they're more likely storing data about the data, right? And you can actually look at that now. If you have an iPhone, they have a new feature where you can see how much data that app is actually storing on you, which is pretty cool. But don't deter away from using WhatsApp. It's still a really great tool, and so many people use it. So it wouldn't be practical to say not to use it anymore, but just to have awareness of making sure, again, your cloud backups are encrypted and that you have that setting turned on. And that you're just cautious with any conversation that you're having. But because it's end-to-end encrypted, it's meeting the standard that we recommend for secure communications. And so yeah, if WhatsApp is the option on the table, use it. Just I think it's just good to have that general awareness of they may be storing more metadata on the conversation. And yeah, them being owned by Meta is something that is kind of a question that you have to be comfortable with and make your own assessment on.
Yeah. I would also suggest, depending on where you are based, maybe using a Google Voice number is also something that you might want to try. And then if something happens with that Google Voice number, say, you're doxxed and the number is put out there, you can always delete it and get a new one. So that's also another option, depending on where you're based.
This next question speaks to sort of the bigger circle of friends and family members around us as well. Can you talk about sites like Ancestry? People put a lot of information about family members out there.
Yeah, so I think that's one that is good to have general awareness of. Not sure, again, it's something you could necessarily like remove or clean up if it's not your personal Ancestry page. Ancestry in forgive me if I'm a little naive here, but I believe it's mostly like it goes back pretty far. You can look up pretty distant relatives on it. I don't know how much it connects to like current family members. With your online footprint and like protecting yourself digitally, we're mainly focused on like the current and the now. So like, could someone get access to your current home address? Could someone get access to your current phone number, or where your kids go to school? All those things, your kids' names, photos of them. We're not as concerned about like the historical stuff because it may not be as relevant, but it's good to have awareness on it. So if you see that, one of your family members has an extensive ancestry page and it may have some revealing information that could be currently relevant or a risk for you, talk to them, see if they can deactivate that page, or see if it's something they could temporarily remove. But yeah, very much so always ask your question, is this something that could like in the moment impact me, if it's revealing like current information? But yeah, always a good idea just to see what's out there on you. Dox yourself. It's the best thing you can do, just to see like what is out there on me and what could be used to harm me or used against me in any way.
Is there a role for mostly using social media on the desktop or website versus mobile app?
I just want to make sure I understand the question correctly. So is there like a difference between using the two? Is that the question?
I think so, yes, in terms of, I guess, security settings on, yeah.
Yeah, so no, they should be uniform across both. The security settings that you see on your phone should be the same that you see on desktop. So no, there shouldn't be a difference between your social media accounts, regardless of what platform you're using it on or what device.
Is it a good idea to keep old social media accounts like hanging on to your Twitter X profile just so someone else doesn't take that handle? Or is it safer to not just have a lingering account in general?
Yeah, I would say that that's a personal decision depending on how you use your social media accounts. So we often recommend separating your personal and private accounts. Um, So that's thinking about what information you have online and who has access to it. So I would again maybe think about what type of information do you have personal information on some of those accounts. I think that is thinking about those questions are really important when it comes to your digital safety on different social media accounts.
One other thing that I'll add to Todd's note is that if you expect that someone's going to impersonate you, or there may be impersonation accounts created in the future, some social accounts, and I believe Twitter is one of them, Facebook might also be one as well, doesn't allow you to submit that impersonation account as impersonation unless you have a legitimate existing account with that platform. So if say you don't use your Twitter, it's pretty inactive, but it still exists. If you expect at any point that there could be someone impersonating you, say you're a little bit more publicly facing, or you have a handful of publications coming out this year and your name may be a little bit more publicly viewed and there may be an impersonation attempt, you may want to keep those accounts active. Just turn on the security settings for them and then just let them sit. So make sure, again, you're using a strong password, you have 2FA set up on them, you're making the account private if needed, but it might be helpful just to keep it that way. If someone is ever impersonating you and they spin up an impersonation account, you can submit it for removal because you have an existing account. If you don't have an account, you may, with certain platforms, not be able to submit a impersonation removal request with that platform.
I'm going to kind of combine a few questions here. We have a question that requests recommendations for a tweet deletion tool, and we've had a few about comparing different password managers, whether the native Google Password Manager works or Apple Keychain and so on. Similarly, I think we had some discussion in the chat around Delete Me versus other data removal tools. So I think I want to ask both of you how you navigate these questions around figuring out which tools to use. How do you figure out what is best and what is not as good?
Yeah, I guess I can kick that off. So for password managers, I would recommend using a password manager in one of the apps versus a keychain. It's just a more secure form of password management. So if you're currently using Google Keychain, it's definitely a step up from writing your passwords in a notebook or storing them in an unsecure note on your phone. And no judgment if you're one of those. We've all been there. But I would say if you can level up to using a password manager app like a LastPass or a Dashlane or a 1Password, that's the gold standard for password management. Again, because it's storing it in a fully end-to-end encrypted form. Also, sometimes with keychains like Apple Keychain or Google Keychain, they don't cross over well between devices. So what's on your Apple Keychain on your laptop might not be as accessible on your phone, or it might not have as all of the account information that you have stored. Whereas with the password managers, whether you're using the mobile app or the desktop app, they're very seamless across devices. So that's what I would say about password managers. As far as Delete Me, or are there other better tools out there? I can only really speak to Delete Me. I don't know if Tat has experience with other ones, but do a little research. If you see another tool that may look better, definitely you can explore it. At the times we use Delete Me for a lot of our staff, so that's the one that I can speak to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also familiar with Delete Me, and there are other ways that you can scrub your data from sites, but that would be sometimes you doing it yourself. Is something that you can do, but that takes a lot of time. One second, let me see if I could share a link.
As you're doing that, Tat, I will just say a huge thank you to you both. It was so wonderful to hear from both of you. And Thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you joined us and you tuned in late, there will be a recording of this webinar up on the AHCJ website in just a few hours. And once again, thank you to our presenters for taking the time to share this expertise. AHCJ and NASW will continue to bring you webinars on a variety of topics related to journalism. Thank you for joining us today, and good luck on your stories.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.